Between camp updates, the athletic preview, reactions, and also the NHL.com Super 16, we have a very jam-packed edition of the show as we'll go over all that, covering your Carolina Hurricanes on the Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes.
Your Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everyday for making this your first listen of the day, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I'm the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hockey Artist, also the co-host of the Surgecast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all of my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. We have a jam-packed Friday episode of the show as we're going to go over the updates from training camp on Thursday. There are a lot of guys back in regular jerseys. That means we are down to 0 no contacts. Also, the Athletic has been going through their season previews for their teams. And then on Thursday, they talked about the Carolina Hurricanes. So we're going to react to it. And then the NHL.com released their most recent Super 16 rankings. Where do the Canes fall in on this? So before we jump into all of that for this busy show, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So, you guys heard me talking Walt Ruff on Thursday as we were kind of waiting to get towards the last preseason game. A lot of guys got assigned to this week, going back to the Chicago Wolves. Unfortunately, Tyson Jost did get picked up by the Nashville Predators. So when you did listen to Thursday's show, we didn't really know if Tyson, at the time, Tyson Jost was still on the team. When we recorded it and, stuff like that on Wednesday, he got picked up. So on the Thursday episode, you kind of heard us talking about him when in reality he was already at the point when you listened, he was picked up by Nashville. But there was a lot to talk about for Thursday, though, because a lot of things have happened from Walt Ruff. Big thanks to him for everything that he does. He said that Jaccob Slavin is the latest guy to shed the bright yellow jersey as he joins Jalen Chatfield and Kendra Miller in the full health of the blue line. That means there are no yellow jerseys left. Even Mark Jankowski has shed the yellow. But the only guy that was not at practice was Jesperi Kotkaniemi. But these were the lines. You had Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis, no surprise here, Svechnikov, Stankov, and Blake, Martin Uxtal, Carrier, Hall of Jankowski, Robinson, with Giovanni Smith kind of filling in there at some points. And then you have the 8 defensemen, Slavin Walker, Miller Chatfield, Nikishin Gostisbehere, and then Mike Riley and Charles Alexis the GOAT. And, of course, the goaltenders of Anderson, Kochetkov, and Caden Primo. It's great to see for the fact that on Thursday, as tomorrow is the last preseason game, and we're less than a week away from the start of the regular season. And you have pretty much 99.9% of your roster basically healthy and ready to go. The only guy you don't have is Jesperi Kotkaniemi because he's still dealing with after getting a stick to the face, he's still kind of about a couple of days away from being ready to go. That's what Rod Burnmore said. Give about a day or two. He's just trying to deal with all of that for getting, like I said, getting a stick to the face. But you pretty much have the rest of the team there, and it's great to see the fact that you see, Jaccob Slavin's pretty much good to go. He's back, and he's paired with Sean Walker. Miller with Chatfield, which a lot of people kind of were thinking might be the case. Then Nikishin Gostisbehere, which I feel like that's probably going to be the third pair for the Hurricanes going into the season, just because of the fact that it kind of gives Nikishin a little bit more time to get used to the system. They're going to throw him in there for a bunch of minutes. And you guys been hearing me kind of say this over the offseason, is that Slavin Walker looked pretty good together in the playoffs last year. And I even said that might be a preview of what this season could look like with Slavin Walker as your top pair. And that's what it's kind of looking like right now. And even Miller Chatfield, that is a very fast and sneaky good second pairing. And then, of course, Ghost helping Nikishin along. That'll be nice. And, of course, you got Mike Riley as your seventh defenseman, but also Charles Alexis Legault has been kind of proving himself a little bit in the preseason, so he is also there as well. But of course, look at the forward core. Pretty much nothing's changed outside of Jankowski sliding into the 4C. He's been kind of on the wing with Robinson for the most part, but now with Jesperi out, Jankowski slides in the middle, and now Giovanni Smith, who's still in his PTO, is still working with the team. But outside of that small change, the top 9, essentially right from the start of camp, has not changed. Like that top pairing of Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis, they've been together the whole time. Same for Svechnikov, Stankov, and Blake, and the Jordans and Carey. And when you guys heard me talk to Walt on Thursday's show, that you kind of had the feeling that these lines have been pretty much set from the jump. Because you would think, okay, maybe if they were going to give Stankov a look, maybe they're going to have him as 2C, maybe take him off and put KK there, and then maybe kind of switch back and forth. There has not been a switch off at all for the 2C spot. So for the fact that they've had Stankov in there as the second line center right from the start of camp, and he's been there the entire time with Svechnikov and Blake, unless something drastically changes between now and next Thursday, which is like 6 days away, I would not be surprised if this is at least your top 9 going into the season. Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis, Svechnikov, Stankov, and Blake, like I said, Jordans and Carrier. Those are probably most likely your top 9. Defense-wise, I'm still interested to see if there is any changes there, because this is the first time that the whole blue line has been together. But if we go into Friday's camp, then go into Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and all that stuff, and those 6 are mainly together, depending on who's your 7th defenseman is, I could see you being Slavin, Walker, Miller, Chatfield, Nikishin, and then Gostisbehere as your top 6 going into the Thursday. Of course, like I said, anything could change between now and then within 6 days. But Rod Brind'Amour usually, unless you see a change every other day, then that could be a different case. But there has really been no changes, and I think that's what you're kind of looking at in terms of your defensive pairs for the most part. And then your top 9, I think, is pretty much set. It's just, is KK ready to go? And of course, with Hall and Robinson, I think those are going to be your 2 wingers on that. So pretty much 99.9% of your roster is set. It's just you got to have KK come back, and then you just got to figure out what you're going to do going from 26 to 23 players. Power play units, nothing's really changed outside of possibly now we see Sean Walker part of the PP2 group instead of Alexander Nikishin. So these are the power play units. Aho, Ehlers, Jarvis with Svechnikov and Gostisbehere. No real surprise there. They've been pretty much been together for all of camp. Blake, Holland, Stankov, those guys have been together for pretty much all of camp. You finally get Miller back, and then you add Sean Walker. There's been a little bit of difference where you might have Nikishin there with Miller or Nikishin and someone else, but right now it's Miller and Walker, and that's actually not bad because you have that offensive-minded guy in Miller, but you also have that defensive guy in Walker in case your power play ends. At least you have that good balance of a 2-way and an offensive guy on your power play unit. So that's kind of what you're looking at right now. And like I said, it's just very Kotkaniemi. Rod Brind'Amour said he may be good in a day or two. It's just he took the stick to the eye face back on last Friday against Tampa. And then one other thing they did ask Rod Brind'Amour about losing Tyson Jost to waivers. He said, you kind of hate to see him leave, but you're happy for him that he's going to get an opportunity. Hopefully he'll cash in there and stick. We loved having him. And yeah, he was a pro's pro. Always had a smile on his face, always did what the Hurricanes asked of him. It's sad to see him go. That's another guy that you really liked having in the organization, did everything the team asked of him, played center, played wing, even when he played, part of the season in Chicago in the AHL, he was a great mentor to all of those guys down there, and probably was a big help to Cam Abbott. So you hate to see him go, but it's just one of those casualties of having to put guys through waivers, and another team really wants him, and Nashville decided they needed him instead, and hopefully he does do well there, and hopefully he sticks and makes an impact on the NHL roster and stuff like that. So we'll see, but just wishing Tyson nothing but the best, and hopefully he does really good over there in Nashville. But those are kind of your updates from training camp from Thursday, is the fact that the entire blue line's back. There are no yellow jerseys. Everyone's in regular jerseys ready to go as we're 6 days away from opening night. And that also makes me wonder, how is the last preseason game roster going to look like? Because most of it, all of it's the NHL guys minus the 3 extras of Primo, Legault, and Giovanni Smith. Do those guys get a little bit of time? Does Mike Riley slide into the lineup too? We'll see, but you kind of get an indication, okay, we're going to see it's going to be a heavy roster going on the road to Nashville on Saturday night for the last tune-up before it starts to count. So it'll be very interesting to see how that works out. But speaking of the season ramping up, The Athletic has been going through their season previews for all their teams, and they talked about the Hurricanes on Thursday. What did they say about the Canes? Well, stick around. We'll talk about it here in a second on a Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. It makes watching football even more exciting. We've got a little something writing on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or love diving into stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. If you're watching the Chargers, the Buccaneers, the Panthers, Eagles, whoever, there's a lot to do with FanDuel. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. All right, so like I said, The Athletic has been going through their season previews. Dom Lecision, Sean Gentile, and Shayna Goldman have been going through all of the teams so far, and they talked about the Carolina Hurricanes on Thursday. And of course, they kind of started off with, the season ended in disappointment for the Hurricanes, and they had to bring up the fact that they couldn't keep Mikko Rantanen and stuff like that. And, they mentioned that expectations were reasonable enough with a roster that's also turnover. Now they say it's a new season, new circumstances, and Carolina, with another high-end piece added to the top of the lineup, is again looking for its breakthrough. Talking about Nikolai Ehlers. So they are predicting that the Carolina Hurricanes are going to have 103.8 points, which will put them 5th best in the NHL, 87% to make the playoffs, which is 5th best, 7.9% to win the Stanley Cup. That is 2nd best out of all the teams. Now, when you look at their point totals, over 120 points, 4%, 7% 120, 11% 115, 15% at 110, and then 17 at 105, 16 at 100. Of course, there's been a lot of sites that have been putting the Hurricanes at 106, but The Athletic in their analysis is putting them at 103.8, so we're going to say 104 for the circumstances. Now, breakdown of where they're going to place in the division. 42% to win the division, 24% for second, 15 for third, 9 for fourth, 6 for fifth, 3% for sixth place, 2% for seventh, and then 1% for eighth place. But basically, in my honest opinion, and then I'll actually do a Metro Division episode next week, so make sure to keep an eye out for that. This is basically the Hurricanes' division to lose, and if the New Jersey Devils can stay healthy. So I'm agreeing with that 42% with their analytics, saying that the Hurricanes are going to win the division. But I could see them possibly finish second too. But to me, I think this is the Hurricanes' division to win. President's Trophy, 9%, 40% in the top 5, 68% in the top 10 in the entire NHL in terms of their points. Now, when it comes to their playoffs, losing in the first round, 33%. That's pretty high considering for the Hurricanes have not lost a opening round or a first round if you count the bubble. In the 7 years that Rod Burnmore has been a head coach, so 33% to lose in the first round seems a little high to me. The division final, 53%. Conference final, 31%. Reaching the Stanley Cup final, 15%. All reasonable numbers. And like I said, 7.9% to win the Stanley Cup. Now, the thing that they also do mention in this is the ceilings and the bottom floor of worst case scenario. Now, they're saying that their best case scenario is 116 points. This is what they said. Ehlers is the missing piece up front, and Nikishin immediately shines on the back end. The Hurricanes use their incredible depth to dominate the regular season, and this time make it count when it matters thanks to jumps to stardom from Jarvis and Svechnikov. Worst case scenario, 91 points. Miller is a bust. Nikishin fails to make an impact, and the team's defense is in shambles. Another injury-riddled season from Anderson pushes Kochetkov to the limelight. where he falters, putting Carolina's playoff hopes in jeopardy. That is definitely a worst case scenario for them to finish with 91 points. And if all that happens, but knock on wood, hopefully that is not the case. Their bottom line, after an especially aggressive offseason, the Hurricanes are looking to build on their perennial contender identity. And of course, they had to put that in air quotes, their perennial contender. The bar for success is higher for the Canes than it is for most. So the real test will be whether Carolina is finally ready to make an impact when it matters the most deep in the playoffs. I mean, they did win an Eastern Conference Final game. Fun. I know it's only one, but they still won one, and they've made the Eastern Conference Final 2 of the last 3 years, 3 in the last 7 in a row at Brandon-Moore. Now, overall, in terms of where they're at overall with all the points they've done, like I said, Carolina's 5th. They have the Stars in 6th with 103, Maple Leafs 101, Jets 100, Devils with 97, and the Panthers, surprisingly enough, 96 points. 10th, their projected points, 10th best. They think that the Panthers are going to be behind the Devils, Jets, Leafs, Stars, Hurricanes, and the Golden Knights are ahead of Carolina at 104. Now, of course, they do talk about the strengths. You're talking about Aho and Jarvis. Those guys kind of taking the next steps. Same thing they're hoping for Svechnikov. Ehlers is a great addition. This is the part that really gets me, is their weakness category. The big question in Carolina, this is what they said in their athletic article. The big question in Carolina always regards the team's high-end talent. Until proven otherwise, that remains this team's largest character flaw. We talked a lot about Aho and Jarvis already, to talk about how great those guys are, but to an extent that also applies to Slavin, offensively anyway. Slavin returned to the franchise tier in this season's player tier and is without question one of the league's absolute best shutdown defensemen. He is worthy and will regarded number one thanks to his defensive game. But this is where it gets really interesting. There is some concern that Slavin's lack of offense as the top dog could be a roadblock to finally getting over the hump. One former player put it bluntly, and I would love to know who this player was. Incredible defender, average passer, no offensive upside. He doesn't do anything when he gets the puck. He's a number one defenseman in Carolina. If he got on a team that had a number one, he would be the number two. He would not supplant that guy as the number one because there are things in his game he does not do. Which is very surprising to me for the fact that Jaccob Slavin has some really sneaky accuracy. He went 4-4 in the accuracy contest a few years ago in the All-Star game, and he scored a OT winner for the Hurricanes against the Washington Capitals in this past postseason. And he's had some ridiculous hard-angle shots that he has scored in. No, he doesn't put up 15, almost 20 goals like some other defensemen in the league do. No, he's not going to be a guy that's going to be pushed for 80, 90, 100 points. He's not Kale McCarr. But Jaccob Slavin does have some offensive upside. That's just not what his game is tailored to. If you want to be an uber elite defender, which he is, there are some other parts of your game that you're not going to maybe focus on as much, but you still have that talent. And to say that he has no offensive upside is kind of mind-boggling to me. Yeah, they say he's an average passer. It's kind of hard to be an average passer when he makes a lot of good tape-to-tape passes and actually has a good side of his game. And his transition game is really good too. I just don't understand where. I would love to know who this player was. To basically put it that way, that Jaccob Slavin has no offensive upside and he's an average passer. I've never seen Jaccob Slavin be an average passer and no offensive upside. His offensive upside is pretty good and consistent if you watch the games. It's just one of those things where Jaccob Slavin's underappreciated, but overall, it's good to see the Athletic has the Hurricanes with some good percentages. Like I said, fifth in points for the entire league, second best odds to win the cup at over 7%, 42% to win a division. Those are great numbers. It's just the lack of the Jaccob Slavin off slander a little bit is a little much, but You know what it is. Keep underappreciating Jaccob Slavin. Everyone in Carolina will appreciate him instead. Now, we talked about that. Now we're going to move on to the NHL.com Super 16 as they've updated their rankings with less than a week before the start of the season. Where do the Hurricanes finish? Well, stick around. We'll talk about that here in a second on a Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. All right, so we talked about the training camp updates. We talked about the Athletics season preview for the Hurricanes. Now we get to talk about the NHL.com's most recent Super 16 rankings update. And this is the fact that we are now less than 6 days away from the start of that. And of course, just to remind everyone, this is how their point system goes. First place gets 16 points. Second place gets 15. Third gets 14, so on and so forth. The Vegas Golden Knights come in as the number 1 team in the ranking, 221 points. The summer ranking, they were number 2. Dallas Stars coming in at number 2 with 206 points. Over the summer, they were number 3. Carolina Hurricanes come with the number 3 spot, 188 points. Over the summer, they were 5th. Edmonton Oilers, 181 points, are in 4th. During the summer, they were 4th. Colorado Avalanche, 168 points, puts them in 5th. Over the summer, had them at 6th. And this is I think this is because of what happened to Sasha Barkov. The Panthers went from number 1 in the summer to number 6 in the Super 16 with 166 points. So I think the fact they lost their captain, some people believe that this team is going to take a step back, which is kind of surprising. The fact that no games have happened yet, and they just, extended Nico Mikkola. But yeah, Florida falls to the number 6 spot, and the Hurricanes move from 5 to 3. And this is what Bill Price, editor-in-chief at AHL.com, said about the Carolina Hurricanes being at number 3 with 188 points. The Hurricanes have consistently been one of the best teams in the NHL the past few seasons, but playoff success has eluded them. Sure, playoff success making, 2 Eastern Conference finals in the last 3 years, always winning in the first round, whatever. Mostly because of the Florida Panthers. Okay, yes. Who have been to the Cup final 3 years in a row, but the Panthers are banged up this year, and right now there is no excuse for the Hurricanes not to be the favorites in the East, especially with the offseason additions of Nikolai Ehlers and K'Andre Miller. Is this the year they finally get over the top? Well, and for the fact that you kind of look at what the top 5 is at, you got Vegas, Dallas, Carolina, Edmonton, Colorado. Inside the top 5, Carolina is the only Eastern Conference team. Florida 6, Winnipeg 7, Tampa 8, Toronto 9, New Jersey 10. So you do have some more Eastern Conference final team, but you're going from 8 to 9 to 10, and even 11 if you're talking about the Washington Capitals, and you have 6 at Florida. But inside the top 5, Carolina is the only Eastern Conference team. And like I said, I'll do a Metro prediction episode next week. But like I said, this is the Carolina Hurricanes division to lose. Their odds are really good. This is a really good roster. This is probably the best depth this team has had in a very long time. I think when you look at the Carolina Hurricanes, and I see why they put them in 3rd on the most recent Super 16 for NHL.com, is the fact that this team, fully healthy, if their top 6 can get rolling with Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis, Svechnikov, Stamkos, and Blake, that is a very scary top 6 who can score a lot of goals and put a lot of hurt on some teams, especially with their speed. There is some size, and there are guys who are not afraid to throw the body as well. Then you have the shutdown line of the Jordans with William Carrier. Pick your poison of who you want to get hit by, because all 3 of those guys are going to hit you in the next week. And then you're talking to Hall, Kokoniemi, and Robinson. Playmaking, wins faceoffs, and has got a lot of speed and had a career season. That is a 4 lines of Carolina Hurricanes that could roll through a lot of teams and just come at you wave after wave after wave. Defensively, if Miller can unlock another level to his game that the Rangers maybe haven't done and did what Brady Shea did, when he came to Carolina, I think the Hurricanes are in a good spot in terms of that aspect if he kind of gets to that next level. Alexander Nikishin, you want to have high expectations of him, but this is his first full year in the NHL. He still has to learn the system, learn the language. So, there's going to be some growing pains with him, but I think he's still going to have a solid season overall. And if you're healthy, your goaltending stays good all season, and rumors are talking about possibly an even, they're going to flip-flop starts and try to keep it more even. As long as the goaltending stays healthy, if the power play, if the penalty kill, I think is going to be top 3, as it always is. As long as the power play doesn't go from 10th to 25th that we saw, and if they stay relatively inside the top 15 on the power play, I think the Hurricanes are in a good spot. If they get in the top 10, then you're playing with house money for the Carolina Hurricanes if you're talking about their power play, because it looks really good. Can it translate to the ice? As long as your PK stays top 3, if your power play is at least top 15, closer to the top 10, and if guys stay healthy and everyone's clicking the way they should, even with some, there might be some, 2-3 game losing streaks here and there because it happens to everyone. But if this team relatively just stays locked in the whole way and doesn't have, stretches where there's lapsing out of games or, defensively breaking down, this is a team that could, like I said, go and win the division, could easily finish top 5 in the entire league, and I think who could win the top seed in the East. I think the Hurricanes are a good enough team to where they could be the number 1 team in the Eastern Conference. They could get home ice advantage through the entire playoffs until whoever they face in the Cup final. That as long as everything, I'm not saying everything has to go right, but as long as the health remains good for the most part, and if we get relatively good special teams, I think this team is going to be fine. Because you got Ehlers, who's supposed to be your top 6 dynamo right now, and you put him with Aho, Jarvis, who have insane chemistry together. I think this is a Carolina Hurricanes team that has a legitimate shot to do something. Could we see them make the Stanley Cup final for the first time in 2006? I'm always optimistic. I think this is a team that could do it. It's just, they've had some different roadblocks. Unfortunately, you get down 3-0 to the Rangers a couple of years ago. You faced the Florida Panthers twice, and the first time you faced them, they backed their way in because Pittsburgh couldn't beat 2 teams to get in, and Florida got on a hot run thanks to Bobrovsky. Last year, Florida was just a menace to everybody, it seemed like, outside of Toronto for whatever reason, but they rolled through everyone. So if the Hurricanes can find a way to just do their thing, get over the hump, and get into the Cup final, I think they have a legitimate shot to do it, no matter who comes out of the West. It could be Edmonton, it could be Colorado, it could be Vegas, whoever. I think if the Hurricanes put themselves in a good spot and not have lapses and just roll and keep and stay locked in the whole way, I think this is a Carolina Hurricanes team that could win a Metro division and finally get into the Cup final for the first time since 2006. Past that, who knows? Could they win a second Cup? Possibly, yeah. I think they can. It'll be hard. It'll be tough because, like I said, whoever's coming out of the West is going to be a tough customer because there's a lot of good teams out West. But this is a division for the Hurricanes. Basically, it's theirs to lose. It's just what are they going to do in the playoffs? That's the big question. But if the health stays there, power play steps up, be at least top 15, closer to top 10. PK does their job. Health is there. All the guys that you need to go get going. I think you're in a very good spot for the Carolina Hurricanes. So having them third in the Super 16 makes so much sense, and I think that's a good spot for them going into it with basically 6 days to the start of the season. But basically, we're at the end of another week of training camp. Only one more preseason to go, game to go, and then a couple more practices. And before you know it, it's going to be Thursday and the start of the regular season. But until then, guys, this will be the Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Thank you for making your first listen with us. For your second listen, let's check out the 2025 NHL season preview shows over on Locked On NHL. A 6-episode series bringing you the best local insight to make you the most informed AHL fan heading into the season. Find Locked On AHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you want to keep up with me, I'm at One True Zach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky at the Zachary Martin. Where if you click the link share in my bio, you can find all of my written content at thehockeywriters.com. Been writing a lot of stuff this past week. Talked about the most recent, roster cuts, guys being signed to Chicago. Also did on a piece on the Hurricanes being on a culture crossroad with a lot of rumors going around. So make sure to check out that article as well. But if you want to check out my other podcasts, it's the Searchcast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube for Locked On Hurricanes. We're on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your podcast. Leave a 5-star rating and review because I might just read it on the show. For YouTube, it's Locked On Hurricanes. Subscribe, hit the bell notification so you don't miss the show. Hit the thumbs up so we know if you like the show as well. Share with other Caniacs to become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Enjoy your Friday. Enjoy your weekend with one more preseason game to go on Saturday against Nashville. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.